"He will break you," the pack elder hissed, her grip bruising Alara's fragile wrists. "Look at him. Cassian isn't just an alpha, he is a monster of the old blood. No woman has ever survived his claiming." Across the sprawling marble ballroom, King Cassian stood in suffocating silence. 7 feet of lethal muscle and volatile power, he watched another high-ranking female cower and flee from his presence, weeping in pure terror. He was the mega-sized Alpha King, a title soaked in fear. Another year, another failed mating ceremony. He turned to leave, the resignation heavy in his broad shoulders, the shadows of the hall swallowing him. "Wait." The word was barely a whisper, yet it shattered the silence. Alara pulled her arm free, and the Omega stepped forward. The silence in the grand ballroom of the Obsidian Estate was not empty. It was pressurized. It pressed against the eardrums and tightened the chests of the 300 elite wolves gathered under the crystal chandeliers. Tonight was the lunar selection, a centuries-old tradition reduced to a modern political nightmare. At the center of the polished floor stood King Cassian. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that strained against the sheer, unnatural mass of his shoulders and chest. He was a genetic anomaly, a throwback to the primordial kings of their kind. Standing over 7 feet tall, he radiated an aura so dense and dominant that lesser wolves had to avert their eyes simply to breathe. For the past hour, the daughters of the wealthiest alpha families had paraded before him. They came wrapped in silk and drenched in ambition, eager to secure the throne. But the moment Cassian's golden predatory eyes locked onto them, the primal reality of what he was broke their resolve. 3 had fainted, 2 had hyperventilated. The last, the fiercely proud daughter of the Western Pack, had sobbed and scrambled backward, her high heels snapping as she fled. Cassian's jaw ticked. He didn't move to stop her. He never did. Standing in the shadows of the arched pillars, Alara watched the king. She was an Omega assigned to the periphery, draped in a simple, understated slate-gray dress that marked her low status. She wasn't supposed to look directly at him. Her instinct screamed at her to lower her chin, to submit to the crushing weight of his presence. But as Cassian turned away from the crowd, Alara saw something the fleeing alpha females had missed. It wasn't malice in the rigid line of his spine. It was a bone-deep, suffocating isolation. The king was a prisoner of his own devastating power. The murmurs began to ripple through the crowd. Unstable, a beast, the council will demand he step down if he remains mateless. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, bruising rhythm. If Cassian fell from power, the council would divide his territories. The fighting pits in the lower wards would lose their only oversight. Her younger brother, currently trapped as a collateral debt in those very pits, would be killed in the crossfire. She couldn't let Cassian lose the throne. Before the rational part of her brain could intervene, Alara's foot moved. The sharp click of her worn silver heel echoing against the marble was the loudest sound in the world. The murmurs died instantly. 300 heads snapped toward her. Alara stepped out from the shadows of the pillars. The distance between her and the king was perhaps 50 feet, but it felt like miles of open, hostile territory. The ambient temperature in the room seemed to plummet. She felt the burning stares of the elite, the disgust, the shock, the sheer disbelief. "An Omega?" someone whispered loudly. "Is she insane? He'll crush her just by breathing on her." Cassian stopped. Slowly, the massive king turned around. When his eyes, twin pools of molten gold, locked onto Alara, the physical impact of his gaze nearly drove her to her knees. Her breath hitched. Every cell in her body screamed at her to show her neck and beg for mercy. He was impossibly huge, casting a long, terrifying shadow that seemed to devour the light around him. Alara forced her chin up. Her hands trembled so violently she had to clench them into fists at her sides, her nails digging half-moons into her palms to ground herself. She took another step, then another. Cassian's expression was an unreadable mask of hard angles and scars, but a dangerous stillness settled over him. He watched the tiny, fragile creature crossing the floor toward him. She smelled of rain, dried lavender, and a terror so profound it tasted metallic in the air. Yet she didn't stop. She stopped exactly 3 feet away from him, craning her neck to meet his gaze. Compared to his towering, muscular frame, she looked like a porcelain doll standing before a hurricane. "I am Alara of the lower wards," she said. Her voice shook, but the words were clear. "And I am here to present myself." A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom, followed by the sound of security guards shifting uncomfortably at the perimeter. Cassian stared down at the Omega. Up close, her fragility was even more pronounced. He could see the frantic pulse beating visibly at the base of her throat, a delicate fluttering blue vein. He could snap her neck with 2 fingers. His wolf, a massive, dark, and violent thing that lurked just beneath his skin, paced agitatedly, confused by the scent of sheer terror, mixed with iron-clad defiance. "An Omega," Cassian rumbled. His voice was a physical vibration. a deep, gravelly bass that rattled the crystal glasses on the nearby tables. "You have lost your way, little one. The kitchens are through the east wing." A few cruel snickers erupted from the Alpha families, breaking the tension slightly. Alara flushed, a hot wave of embarrassment washing over her pale cheeks, but she didn't retreat. "I know exactly where I am, Your Majesty." Cassian tilted his head. The movement was slow, deliberate, like a predator assessing a particularly strange prey. He took a single half step forward. The proximity was overwhelming. The heat radiating off his massive chest felt like a furnace. Alara forced herself not to flinch as his shadow entirely consumed her. "Do you know why those women ran?" Cassian asked, his voice dropping to a low register meant only for her. It wasn't a threat, it was a warning. "They ran because my wolf cannot be subdued. My strength is not civil. If I lose control during a mating frenzy, an alpha female would be severely broken. An omega—" He let his golden eyes drag over her slender frame. "An omega would not survive the night." "They ran because they want a crown, but they are afraid of the monster wearing it," Alara replied, her voice trembling slightly, yet laced with a sharp edge that caught Cassian completely off guard. His eyes narrowed. No one spoke to him like that. Not his generals, not the council, and certainly not the lowest-ranking members of his society. "And you?" he asked, the danger in his tone escalating. "Are you not afraid?" "I am terrified," Alara admitted, her honesty stark and disarming. "My knees are shaking. I feel like I can't breathe." "Then why are you standing here?" "Because I have something you need, and you have something I need," she said, finally releasing her clenched fists. "The council requires you to take a mate by midnight tonight, or they will invoke the instability clause. They will strip you of your executive command. You don't need a mate to survive a physical claiming. You need a mate in name, a political shield." Cassian went entirely still. The fact that a lowly Omega understood the high-level political machinations of the council was shocking enough. The fact that she was bold enough to leverage it to his face was unheard of. "I can be your shield," Alara continued, her voice gaining a fraction of steadiness. "I will stand by your side. I will endure the public scrutiny. I will not run from your presence. In exchange, I require a royal pardon and the immediate extraction of prisoner 402 from the fighting pits." Cassian's eyes flared. A trade! She was bartering with her life. He looked at the frantic pulse in her neck again. It wasn't a thirst for power driving her. It was pure, desperate love for whoever prisoner 402 was. He slowly lowered his massive head until his face was inches from hers. Alara held her breath, closing her eyes for a split second before forcing them open to meet his golden stare. "You are offering to lock yourself in a cage with a beast," Cassian whispered, the sound a dark promise, "to save someone else." "Will you accept the terms?" she asked, her voice cracking. Cassian stared into her wide hazel eyes. He saw the resolve anchoring her fear. For the first time in his life, someone had looked past his monstrous exterior and offered a pragmatic, unvarnished deal. Without a word, Cassian reached out. His massive, scarred hand dwarfed hers completely as he took her small, cold hand in his. He didn't crush it. His touch was shockingly restrained. He turned his colossal frame to face the stunned, silent ballroom. "The lunar selection is concluded." Cassian's voice boomed, echoing like thunder against the marble walls. "I have found my queen." The private wing of the king was not a sanctuary. It was a fortress. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind them, the sound of the locking mechanism echoing with finality. Alara stood perfectly still in the entryway of Cassian's penthouse suite. Everything here was scaled to his monstrous proportions. The ceilings were vaulted to a dizzying height. The furniture was massive, crafted from heavy iron and dark leather, built to withstand a giant's weight. Even the drinking glasses on the wet bar looked like heavy crystal pitchers. She felt like a child who had wandered into a giant's lair. Cassian walked past her, shrugging off his tailored suit jacket. He tossed it onto a massive armchair, his broad back to her. Beneath his white dress shirt, the thick corded muscles of his shoulders and back moved with lethal fluidity. Faint, jagged lines of old scars bled through the expensive fabric, a testament to a violent past. "Your brother," Cassian said suddenly, not turning around. He moved to the bar and poured an amber liquid into a glass. "That is prisoner 402, Liam." Alara stiffened. You knew?" "I am the king. I know everything that happens in my city," Cassian said. He turned around, leaning his heavy hips against the bar, swirling the drink. He accrued a gambling debt with Alpha Marcus of the Southern Ward. When he couldn't pay, Marcus threw him in the pits to fight it off. He's scheduled to fight a purebred enforcer tomorrow night. A death sentence. Alara's breath hitched. "You promised." "And I keep my word," Cassian replied smoothly. He pressed a button on his smartwatch. "Commander, send a strike team to the southern pits. Extract prisoner 402. Place him under royal medical protection. If Alpha Marcus objects, tell him his king will speak with him in the morning. He dropped his wrist. Done! A wave of relief so intense washed over Alara that her knees actually buckled. She caught herself on the edge of a heavy console table, letting out a shaky exhale. He was safe. Liam was safe. Cassian watched her near collapse, his golden eyes narrowing. He took a sip of his drink. You traded your life for his, a noble, if incredibly foolish, sacrifice. It isn't a sacrifice if we have an understanding, Alara said, straightening up, trying to regain her composure. We are mates in name only. I fulfill the council's requirement. You keep your throne. Cassian pushed off the bar, slowly closing the distance between them. The sheer mass of him ate up the space in the room. Alara forced herself to hold her ground, though her heart hammered a frantic tattoo against her ribs. He stopped just a foot away, looming over her, a dark monolith. Do you understand what mates in name only means in this world, Alara? He murmured. It means you live here, in these rooms, with me. It means when the pack elders demand proof of our bond, you will have to stand by my side and pretend you are not terrified of the monster breathing down your neck. You will wear my mark. He reached out his thick, calloused thumb, lightly brushing the fragile line of her jaw. The contact sent a jolt of static electricity straight down Alara's spine. He was so hot, his skin radiating a feverish heat. And, Cassian continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous, gravelly whisper, it means that my wolf, who has been starved of a mate his entire existence, now knows you belong to him. Keeping him restrained so I do not accidentally break you in half will be my burden. Alara swallowed hard, looking up into his golden eyes. They weren't just predatory now. They were conflicted, swirling with a dark, heavy hunger and a rigid, painful discipline. Suddenly Alara frowned. Her Omega senses, sharp and finely tuned to emotional and physical shifts, picked up something wrong. Not from Cassian, from the room, a draft, a scent that didn't belong to the rain, the leather, or Cassian's masculine musk. It smelled like ozone and polished steel. Cassian saw her eyes dart toward the heavy velvet curtains masking the floor-to-ceiling windows. He frowned, misinterpreting her fear. I told you I will not force. Quiet, Alara whispered urgently, her hand snapping up to press against his solid chest. Cassian froze, shocked by the audacity of her touch. But before he could speak, Alara lunged sideways, throwing her small body against his massive one with all her meager strength. Crack! The reinforced glass of the window shattered inward. A high-caliber sniper round tore through the space where Cassian's chest had been a fraction of a second before, burying itself deep into the stone pillar behind them. The king was under attack. The deafening crack of the sniper rifle was instantly swallowed by the explosive roar of a primordial beast. Before the shattered glass could even hit the carpet, Cassian moved. For a man of his colossal size, his speed was horrifying, a blur of violent motion defying physics. He didn't just pull Alara down, he engulfed her. His massive body crashed over hers, driving them both into the thick Persian rug as a second bullet tore through the space they had just occupied, shredding the leather armchair behind them. The weight of the king was absolute. Alara was pinned beneath hundreds of pounds of pure, dense muscle, completely encased in his shadow. The air was knocked from her lungs in a sharp gasp. Around them, the penthouse erupted into chaos. Sirens wailed, painting the dark room in frantic flashes of crimson light. Stay down, Cassian snarled. It wasn't human speech. It was a guttural command ripped straight from the chest of his wolf. The sound vibrated through the floorboards and deep into Alara's bones, triggering a primal instinct to freeze. She lay perfectly still, her cheek pressed against the rough wool of the rug. Above her, Cassian was a fortress of tense, coiled violence. His heart was a massive, heavy drum pounding against her shoulder. Within seconds, the heavy oak doors of the suite were kicked open. Flashlights sliced through the darkness, accompanied by the sharp, synchronized movements of the king's elite guard. Clear the perimeter, protect the king, the commander roared. Cassian didn't shift his weight immediately. He kept Alara entirely shielded, his head raised, his golden eyes scanning the shattered window for a secondary threat. Only when the commander gave the all-clear signal did Cassian finally push himself up onto his knees. He didn't stand. Instead, he reached down, his massive hands spanning her waist effortlessly, and lifted Alara from the floor as if she weighed absolutely nothing. Are you hit? He demanded. His voice was raw, frayed at the edges. No, Alara gasped, struggling to catch her breath. No, I'm okay, I'm just bruised. Cassian's golden eyes dragged over her, searching for blood. When he found none, the frantic, murderous edge in his gaze shifted into something far more complex. He stared down at the tiny Omega trembling in his grip. Alphas were biologically wired to anticipate danger, to protect their pack. Yet Cassian had sensed nothing until it was too late. She had sensed it. Her delicate Omega instincts, fine-tuned to atmospheric shifts and unnatural scents, had detected the ozone of the discharged rifle a fraction of a second before the bullet struck. You moved me, Cassian whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. He looked at his own massive chest, then down at her fragile hands. You threw yourself at a 7-foot alpha to push me out of a sniper's path. You were going to be shot, Alara said, her voice shaking violently now that the adrenaline was receding. We made a deal. I couldn't let you die. Cassian's jaw tightened so hard it looked carved from granite. His wolf, an entity that had viewed her merely as a fragile necessity minutes ago, suddenly locked onto her with a terrifying, possessive clarity. She was small, weak, and terrified, but she had fought for him. Commander, Cassian said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register as he finally stood, keeping Alara tucked tightly against his side. Lock down the estate, no one leaves, and prepare the vault. 10 minutes later, Cassian carried Alara into the inner sanctum of the penthouse, a reinforced steel vault disguised as a panic room. The heavy blast doors sealed shut behind them, cutting off the wail of the sirens. The room was Spartan, lit by low emergency lights. Cassian set Alara down on a plush sofa, then began to pace the narrow length of the room. He was a caged behemoth, his sheer size making the walls seem to shrink. Every time he passed her, the air crackled with his agitated dominance. Alara pulled her knees to her chest, watching him. She should have been terrified. She was locked in a steel box with a volatile, mega-sized predator who had just been targeted for assassination. But as she watched the heavy rise and fall of his chest, she didn't see a monster. She saw a king who was desperately trying not to lose control for her sake. You can stop pacing, she said softly. Cassian stopped abruptly. He turned his head, his golden eyes glowing in the dim light. My wolf is close to the surface, Alara. Someone tried to kill me and they nearly killed you in the process. It is taking every ounce of my willpower not to tear the city apart looking for them. I am safe, she reminded him, keeping her voice incredibly steady. It was an Omega's true strength, the ability to de-escalate, to soothe the savage beast. We are both safe. Cassian stared at her, the frantic pacing halting completely. He let out a long, ragged exhale, crossing the room to kneel on the floor before her. Even on his knees, he was nearly eye level with her as she sat on the sofa. He reached out, his massive fingers ghosting over a red mark on her collarbone where she had hit the floor. Tomorrow the council will demand answers, he murmured, and they will demand proof that you are truly mine. Are you prepared for what comes next, little bird? I am, she lied, her pulse racing beneath his hovering touch. Morning arrived not with sunlight, but with the harsh, buzzing reality of political warfare. The heavy blast doors of the safe room hissed open, revealing the king's commander holding a secure tablet. He looked exhausted, his uniform dusted with plaster from the investigation. My king, the commander said, bowing his head respectfully, though his eyes darted to Alara with lingering disbelief. The sniper escaped. The trajectory points to the North Tower, an area supposedly secured by the council's own guards. The bullet we recovered from the pillar was a silver tungsten core. Cassian's low growl vibrated through the steel walls. Silver tungsten, a round specifically designed to bypass an alpha's accelerated healing and shatter bone. It was an expensive, highly illegal munition. And the council? Cassian asked, his voice a dangerous rumble. They are waiting in the Grand Chamber, the commander replied hesitantly. They are demanding an emergency session regarding the breach and regarding your claim on the Omega. Alpha Marcus is leading the charge. He claims the mating is a farce to avoid the instability clause, and he intends to challenge your right to the throne. Alara's stomach plummeted. Marcus, the man who had imprisoned her brother. If Marcus took the throne, Liam would be executed before the sun set. Let them wait, Cassian commanded, waving the commander out. The doors sealed shut once more, leaving the two of them alone in the quiet tension of the vault. Cassian turned to Alara. In the stark overhead lighting, his imposing figure was even more terrifying. He wore a fresh black shirt, the fabric straining against his biceps, emphasizing the sheer unnatural bulk of him. Marcus is a prideful, vicious man, Cassian said, stepping closer. He will use his alpha aura to try and force you to submit in front of the council. He will try to make you confess that this is a business transaction, and they will look for the mark. Alara swallowed hard. The mark. In their world, a true mating was sealed with a bite to the scent gland on the neck, a permanent physical brand that merged their scents entirely, but they hadn't mated. I cannot bite you, Cassian said, his voice lowering, softening in a way that made Alara's breath catch. My jaw strength. If my wolf takes over during the bite, I will crush your windpipe. It is too dangerous, but we must convince them. How? She asked, her voice a mere whisper. A scent claim, Cassian answered, closing the final few feet between them. The heat radiating off him enveloped her instantly. I have to cover you in my scent, so heavily that Marcus's aura cannot penetrate it. It requires proximity. Alara's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Do it. Cassian hesitated. His golden eyes searched hers, looking for the inevitable flinch, the terror. When she only stood her ground, tilting her chin up, a muscle feathered in his jaw. Slowly, agonizingly so, Cassian reached out. His massive hands, warm and callous, cupped her delicate face. Alara gasped at the contact. He was so incredibly strong, yet his touch was remarkably gentle, treating her as if she were spun glass. He leaned down. The sheer size of him blocking out the light was overwhelming. Alara closed her eyes as Cassian's face hovered inches from her neck. She could feel his hot breath fanning across her pulse point, making the fine hairs on her skin stand up. "Breathe, little one," he murmured against her skin, the vibration of his voice sending a shiver straight down her spine. Then he pressed his jaw against her neck. The contact was electric. Cassian rubbed the heavy scent glands along his jawline against the soft skin of her throat. It was a deeply intimate, possessive gesture. The scent of him, dark pine, ozone, and a rich, spicy musk, flooded her senses, overwhelming her completely. It was a heavy, dominant scent, meant to warn away predators and declare ownership. Cassian breathed her in deeply, his nose trailing up to the shell of her ear. He lingered there, his chest rumbling with a soft, pleased sound that was entirely wolf. Alara's knees went weak. The sheer dominance of his scent was intoxicating, bypassing her logical brain and speaking directly to her omega instincts. She felt safe, impossibly, utterly safe. He pulled back slowly, his eyes heavy and entirely gold. He stared at the flushed, delicate skin of her neck, now thoroughly coated in his scent. "When we walk out those doors," Cassian said, his voice rougher than before, "you are the queen of the Obsidian Estate. Do not bow your head to Marcus, you answer only to me." "I understand," Alara whispered, fighting the dizziness in her head. Cassian offered her his arm. "Then let us go face the wolves." The grand chamber was a brutalist amphitheater carved from dark stone, designed to make those standing in the center feel utterly insignificant. Today it was packed with the highest-ranking alphas of the council. When the heavy doors swung open, the murmurs instantly ceased. King Cassian entered, a towering monolith of dark fury, and on his arm, looking dangerously small but perfectly composed, was Alara. The visual contrast was startling. Cassian was a weapon of mass destruction, a man whose sheer size forced others to step back. Alara was a fragile reed, yet she walked in step with him, her back straight, her chin held high. As they stepped into the center of the chamber, the oppressive weight of a dozen alpha auras slammed into Alara. It was a physical pressure, designed to force Omegas to their knees. She stumbled slightly, a gasp escaping her lips. Instantly, Cassian stepped slightly in front of her. He released a low, warning snarl, letting a fraction of his own monstrous aura bleed into the room. It hit the council members like a physical shockwave. Several alphas visibly flinched, their postures rigid with sudden terror. The pressure on Alara vanished immediately, blocked entirely by Cassian's overpowering presence. "You requested this meeting, Marcus," Cassian's voice boomed, echoing off the stone wall. "Speak." "Ike." Alpha Marcus stepped forward from the shadows of the council tiers. He was a large man, though still dwarfed by Cassian, with cruel, sharp features. He sneered down at Alara. "We are here to discuss this farce," Marcus spat, gesturing to her. "The instability clause requires you to take a mate of equal standing to ground your volatile nature, Cassian. You bring us a rat from the lower wards. I can smell her fear from here." "You smell your own arrogance, Marcus," Cassian replied coldly. Marcus's eyes flashed red. "I invoke the right of inquiry," he shouted, stepping down to the main floor. He locked eyes with Alara and unleashed his alpha command voice, a sonic weapon meant to force total submission. "Omega, tell the council the truth. He paid you to stand there. You are not his mate." The command hit Alara like a physical blow to the chest. Her knees buckled, her vision swimming. The biological imperative to fall to the floor and whimper. The truth was agonizing. But as she swayed, Cassian didn't catch her. He simply turned, placing his massive hand on the small of her back. His scent, the dark pine and ozone he had rubbed onto her neck, flared up, blanketing her mind, cutting through Marcus's command like a hot knife through butter. She wasn't alone. She was the king's. Alara took a deep breath, anchoring herself on the solid heat of Cassian's hand. She forced herself to stand tall, looking Marcus dead in the eye. "I am Alara, queen of the Obsidian Pack," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut clearly through the silence of the room. "And you, Alpha Marcus, are in violation of pack law." A stunned silence fell over the chamber. Even Cassian looked down at her, a flicker of absolute surprise crossing his stoic features. "What did you say to me, you little—" Marcus snarled, taking a step forward. Cassian's roar shook dust from the rafters. "Step back, Marcus, or I will tear your throat out." Marcus froze, his face pale as Cassian's wolf surfaced, his canines lengthening. Alara didn't miss a beat. "By invoking the right of inquiry, you submit yourself to the Queen's judgment, Dondao," she continued, her voice gaining strength, drawing on the immense power radiating from the man beside her. I have reviewed the estate's ledgers. You have been illegally running the southern fighting pits, circumventing the king's taxation, and kidnapping citizens from the lower wards to fight off debts they did not owe. A treasonous offense. The council members erupted into shocked whispers. Marcus's face drained of color entirely. Lies, Marcus sputtered. She has no proof. The king's guard extracted a prisoner from your pits last night, Alara said coldly. He is currently giving a full testimony to the royal scribes. Marcus looked frantically from Alara to Cassian. He had expected a cowering Omega. He had not expected a tactical strike on his illegal operations. Cassian looked down at Alara, his chest swelling with something akin to fierce, undeniable pride. His wolf practically purred. She hadn't just shielded him politically. She had drawn blood. Guards, Cassian ordered, his voice echoing with absolute authority. Take Alpha Marcus to the holding cells pending a full tribunal. As Marcus was dragged away shouting obscenities, Alara let out a small, trembling breath. She had done it. She had secured Liam's safety permanently. But as her gaze swept over the remaining council members, her Omega senses flared again. That same scent from the penthouse, the sharp metallic tang of ozone and gun oil. It was coming from Elder Thorn, the king's most trusted advisor, who was currently staring at Alara with cold, calculating, and murderous eyes. The sniper wasn't an external enemy. The call was coming from inside the house. The heavy mahogany doors of the king's private study slammed shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the cavernous space. Cassian released a breath he seemed to have been holding since they left the grand chamber. The sheer force of his exhalation ruffled the loose papers on his massive desk. He unbuttoned the top 2 buttons of his shirt, the corded muscles of his thick neck bunching with residual tension. Marcus will be stripped of his titles by midnight, Cassian rumbled, pacing the length of the room. The council is terrified of you, Alara, an Omega who weaponizes ledgers instead of submitting to auras. They have never seen anything like it. He stopped, turning to look at her, a rare, genuine glimmer of respect shining in his golden eyes. But the smile died on his lips when he saw her standing rigidly by the unlit fireplace, her arms wrapped tightly around her waist, her face pale. "What is it?" he asked, the space between them vanishing in 2 massive strides. He didn't touch her, but his immense body hovered over hers, an instinctively protective shield. "Are you injured? Did Marcus's command voice hurt you?" "No," Alara whispered, her hazel eyes darting up to meet his. "It isn't Marcus. Marcus is a thug. He runs fighting pits and extorts debts. He doesn't have the resources or the tactical precision to hire a sniper with silver tungsten rounds." Cassian's brow furrowed, his golden eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. "Go on." "When I looked at the council members," Alara swallowed, her throat incredibly dry. She knew what she was about to say could fracture the king's foundation. "I smelled it again, the scent from the penthouse just before the glass shattered. Ozone, gun oil, cold steel." Cassian went terrifyingly still. The ambient temperature in the room seemed to plummet as his wolf surged violently against the cage of his ribs. "Who?" The word was less spoken and more ripped from his throat. "Elder Thorn," she breathed. Cassian physically recoiled, taking a step back as if she had struck him. "No," he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly, vibrating bass line. "Thorn raised me. When my father was assassinated, Thorn shielded me from the rival packs. He is the one who taught me to control my wolf so I wouldn't have to be put down like a rabid beast. He is my most trusted advisor." "He was staring at me, Cassian," Alara insisted, stepping toward him, closing the distance he had just created. "Not with shock, with cold, calculated fury. I ruined his plan today." Cassian turned away, bracing his massive hands on the edge of his oak desk. The wood groaned under his weight, fine cracks splintering along the polished surface. He was a creature of absolute loyalty, and the idea of his surrogate father orchestrating his murder was a poison he couldn't immediately swallow. "My wolf believes you," Cassian ground out, his knuckles turning white. "My instincts are screaming that you are right, but the king cannot execute his highest elder based on an Omega scent memory, no matter how accurate. I need proof. If I strike at Thorn without it, the council will fracture, and civil war will tear the city apart." Alara stepped up directly behind him. She reached out, placing her small, warm hand flat against the center of his broad, tense back. Cassian shuddered at the contact, the raging beast inside him instantly leaning into her touch. "Then we give him a reason to expose himself," Alara said quietly, her mind racing. "Why did he want you dead yesterday, but not today?" Cassian looked over his colossal shoulder. "Because yesterday I was mateless. If I died, the throne would pass to the council entirely. Today I have a queen. If I die now, pack law dictates that you, as my bonded mate, hold executive power until a new alpha is chosen." "Which means," Alara concluded, a chill running down her spine, "I am now the obstacle. He can't kill you until he removes me." Cassian spun around, his hands coming up to grip her upper arms. His grip was completely rigid, a man fighting his own monstrous strength to keep from crushing her. His eyes were entirely swallowed by black, the golden irises reduced to thin rings of fire. Absolutely not, Cassian snarled, reading her mind. I will not use you as bait. I will not put you in the path of a predator. I am already in his path, Alara said fiercely, refusing to back down from the overwhelming pressure of his gaze. Cassian, look at me. I survived the lower wards. I survived the lunar selection. I can survive Thorn, but only if we draw him out into the light. Cassian stared down at her, his chest heaving. She was impossibly small, yet she held a gravity that matched his own. Slowly he released her arms, sliding his massive palms down to gently cup her face. If he lays a single finger on you, Cassian whispered, pressing his forehead against hers, a terrifyingly intimate gesture that made her heart flutter wildly. There will not be enough left of him for the scribes to bury. The royal archives were located deep beneath the Obsidian Estate, a labyrinth of stone corridors and towering shelves filled with centuries of pack history. It was cold, damp, and isolated, the perfect place for a queen to supposedly research pack law in private. Alara sat at a heavy wooden table in the center of the main reading room, a single brass lamp illuminating the ancient leather-bound tome in front of her. Her heart was beating so fast she felt nauseous. Cassian had made a very public exit an hour ago, loudly announcing a perimeter inspection of the northern wards. The estate's security detail had been halved, drawn away by a fabricated border dispute. She was entirely alone, or so it seemed. The heavy iron door to the archives creaked open, the sound scraped against the oppressive silence. Alara didn't look up immediately. She slowly turned a page of the book, forcing her trembling hands to remain steady. Footsteps echoed on the stone floor, measured, confident, and lacking the heavy gait of the royal guard. It is admirable in a pathetic sort of way. A smooth, cultured voice echoed through the stacks. Alara closed the book and looked up. Elder Thorn stepped into the dim pool of light. He was an older wolf, distinguished white, with silver hair and a tailored suit. He carried a silver-tipped walking cane, though he walked with no limp. Two massive, unmarked enforcers stepped out of the shadows behind him, blocking the only exit. "Researching your new kingdom, little Omega?" Thorn asked, a condescending sneer curling his lip. "A waste of time. You won't be here long enough to understand it." "Elder Thorn," Alara said, keeping her voice carefully even. She stood up, smoothing the front of her slate-gray dress. "I was under the impression the king's archives were restricted to the royal bloodline." "The king," Thorn spat the word like a curse. "Cassian is an abomination, a genetic mistake. He belongs in a cage, not on a throne. For years I managed him. I kept his monstrous nature suppressed with narcotics and political maneuvering. I was going to use the instability clause to peacefully transition power to a civilized council. But I stepped forward," Alara said. "Yet you." Thorn's eyes narrowed into slits of pure hatred. "A gutter rat who thinks she can play queen. You grounded his wolf. You gave him legal stability. You ruined a decade of careful planning." He tapped his cane on the stone floor. The two enforcers drew heavy, silenced pistols. "It will be a tragedy," Thorn continued smoothly. "The new queen, tragically murdered by Marcus's loyalists in revenge. The grief will send Cassian feral. He will lose control completely, and the council will be legally forced to execute him to protect the city. A neat, tidy end to the primordial bloodline." Thorn nodded to the enforcers. "Kill her." The enforcers raised their weapons. Alara braced herself, staring down the barrels, but the shots never came. The brass lamp on the table flickered and violently shattered, plunging the room into near-total darkness. A sound followed, a wet, sickening crunch of bone, accompanied by a gurgling scream that was instantly silenced. Thorn stumbled backward, his composure shattering. "Fire! Fire blindly!" The remaining enforcer fired twice into the darkness, the muzzle flashes briefly illuminating a nightmare. Cassian hadn't just been hiding. He had melted into the shadows above them. He dropped from the high archways like a falling boulder. The second enforcer didn't even have time to scream. Cassian's massive hand clamped over the man's face, driving him back into the stone wall with a force that cracked the masonry. The enforcer crumpled, unconscious and broken. The lights flickered back on, powered by the emergency generator. Cassian rose to his full, terrifying 7-foot height. He was not the king right now. He was the mega-size Alpha, a primordial beast unleashed. His eyes were entirely black, his fangs fully descended, and a low, continuous roar vibrated from his chest, shaking the dust from the ceiling. Thorn fell to his knees, dropping his cane, his aristocratic face frozen in absolute primal terror as death approached him. Cassian took a slow, heavy step toward the elder, his massive claws extending. He was going to rip Thorn apart. "Cassian!" The voice was a sharp, clear bell cutting through a hurricane. Cassian paused, his massive shoulders heaving. He turned his head slowly. Alara stood exactly where she had been, untouched, unharmed. Do not kill him, Alara said, stepping around the table, entering the immediate strike zone of the apex predator. If you kill him in the dark, you are the monster he says you are. If you drag him before the council to face justice, you are the king. Cassian's chest rose and fell violently. The internal war between the wolf's desire for immediate bloody vengeance and the man's duty was agonizing to witness. He let out a deafening, frustrated roar that forced Thorn to cover his ears in agony, but then Cassian looked at Alara. He looked at her calm, steady hazel eyes. She wasn't afraid of the beast, she was anchoring it. Slowly, agonizingly, the black receded from his eyes, leaving the brilliant gold behind. The fangs retracted, the king returned. Cassian reached down, grabbing Thorn by the lapels of his expensive suit, and lifted the elder entirely off the ground with one hand. "Guards!" Cassian bellowed, his voice carrying up the stairwell. Heavy boots instantly pounded down the stone steps. "Take this filth to the deepest cell we have. Prepare a public tribunal for high treason." The Obsidian estate was quiet. It was the deep, heavy silence that follows a violent storm. Thorn was locked away, the council, terrified by the revelation of the elder's treason and the undeniable proof of Cassian's lethal controlled power, had sworn absolute fealty. The threat was neutralized. Alara stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of the royal bedchamber, looking out over the glittering lights of the city below. The glass had been repaired, the room scrubbed of any sign of the previous night's violence. She wore a simple white silk robe, her long hair falling loosely over her shoulders. She heard the heavy oak doors open and click shut. Cassian walked in. He had stripped off his suit, wearing only a pair of dark, loose-fitting sleep trousers. The sheer mass of his bare torso was awe-inspiring. A landscape of thick, corded muscle, painted with the faint silver scars of a lifetime of battles he had fought to keep his throne. He didn't approach her immediately. He stopped by the massive, four-poster bed, running a hand through his dark hair. He looked exhausted, the weight of his crown pressing heavily on his broad shoulders. "Liam has been settled in a private suite in the East Wing," Cassian said, his voice a low, soothing rumble in the quiet room. "The best healers in the pack are tending to him. He will make a full recovery." Alara turned, a profound wave of gratitude washing over her. "Thank you for saving him, for saving both of us." Cassian finally looked at her, his golden eyes burning with an intensity that made her breath hitch. He took a slow step forward, then another, until he was standing just a few feet away. His heat radiated across the space between them. "The danger has passed, Alara," Cassian said quietly. The words seemed to cost him a great deal of physical effort to speak. "Marcus is deposed. Thorn is awaiting execution. The council will not dare challenge my rule again, not after what happened today." He looked down at his massive hands, flexing his fingers. "You fulfilled your end of the bargain. You acted as my shield. You rooted out the rot in my inner circle. You are the bravest creature I have ever known." He took a deep breath, his chest expanding massively. "You are free to go. Tomorrow I will arrange for a private estate for you and your brother. You will have wealth, protection, and your freedom. You do not have to spend the rest of your life locked in a cage with me." Alara stared at him. He was giving her everything she had ever wanted when she lived in the squalor of the lower wards. He was offering her an out, but as she looked at the mega-sized Alpha King, the monster everyone feared, the beast who had just restrained his most violent instincts simply because she asked him to, she realized something terrifyingly beautiful. She didn't want to leave. "And what happens to you, Cassian?" Alara asked, her voice a soft, steady whisper. Cassian flinched slightly at the sound of his name on her lips. "I will rule," he said gruffly, "as I always have." "Alone," she corrected, taking a step toward him. "I am used to the dark, little bird," he murmured. Unable to look away from her. "I'm not," Alara said. She took another step, entirely closing the distance between them. She tilted her head back to look up at his face. "I'm not used to it, and I don't want to go back to it, Cho." Cassian's breath hitched, his wolf surged against his skin, a desperate whining plea for the mate standing right in front of him. "Alara, do not play with this. If you stay, there is no stepping back. If my wolf claims you tonight, it is permanent. My possessiveness, my size, I am terrified of crushing you." "You couldn't crush me if you tried," Alara whispered fiercely. She reached up, her small hands resting flat against the hard, hot planes of his chest. She felt the heavy, frantic pounding of his heart beneath her palms. It matched her own. "You are the strongest alpha in existence," she said, trailing her fingers up his chest to rest lightly on his thick shoulders. "But your greatest strength isn't your physical power, Cassian. It's your control. It's your heart." Cassian let out a fractured groan, a sound of complete surrender. His massive arms came around her, pulling her flush against his solid body. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her scent, rain lavender, and now the heavy, undeniable scent of desire. "Mine," his wolf rumbled, the vibration traveling from his chest into hers. Yours, she agreed, tilting her head to expose the fragile line of her throat, offering him the very thing every other female had guarded with their lives. Cassian's lips brushed against her scent gland. He was impossibly gentle. His large hands spanned her entire back, holding her as if she were the most precious, fragile artifact in the world. When his teeth finally grazed her skin, there was no pain, only a searing, electric heat that bonded their souls, their scents, and their lives together forever. The king had finally found his queen, and the monster was finally at peace. Thank you so much for reading this dramatic, high-stakes romance. If you loved Alara's bravery, Cassian's fierce devotion, and the intense, slow-burn tension of their journey, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Drop a comment below letting me know your favorite moment. Was it the ballroom confrontation, the archive trap, or the final claiming? See you in the next story.